Well, good afternoon. We hardly know how to act. Is that true? Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for being here today for the installation of Professor Douglas Luke as the Irving Lewis Horowitz Professor in Social Policy. I am deeply grateful to see each and every one of you in person. It is wonderful to be here, and as we recognize Mary Curtis Horowitz and Doug Luke. And I hope that you enjoyed seeing each other after many months and interacting just a little bit face-to-face as humans. Thank you. Endowed professorships are among the highest honor Washington University can bestow on a faculty member. It reflects our deep appreciation for the profound contributions the recipient has made to Washington University, to the field of research that this person studies, and to society. Doug is part of a large community of individuals at Washington University and the Brown School who hold endowed professorships and other positions, and they are recognitions of their extensive work in their field of study. With today's installation, we recognize Doug's innovative work in the field of public health policy as a member of the Brown School faculty and a member of the Institute for Public Health. So I'd like to first recognize Bill Powderly. Bill, you should give us a wave. We haven't seen you in a while. The Larry J. Shapiro, Director of the Institute for Public Health, who's joined us today to honor Doug's tremendous accomplishments at the Institute. Also, allow me to extend a warm welcome to Dean Eddie Lawler, Betsy Lawler. Eddie, you were a champion and continue to be a champion for public health, and you're a big part of why Doug is here. So thank you. Welcome to Eddie. Welcome to Betsy. So let me also welcome all of you. We have many guests who join us today from across the campus, as well as friends and families of Mary Horowitz and Professor Doug Luke. They're here in our audience, but through that camera lens, there are many, many other people that are in celebration with us today. So, can you join me in first a good round of applause for Doug's family as we welcome them to this space. Welcome Susan England, Doug's wife, son and daughter-in-law, Andrew and Maisie, and Alina Luke, who, can we be proud, is also a Brown School alum. So welcome. Doug's mom, Susan Luke, it's a very proud day for a mother. As well as you are joined, Doug, by many of your university colleagues, your friends, family members, both in person and also virtually. And Doug shared that this is a pretty significant family get-together. He hasn't seen them either. And so it's wonderful to celebrate with your people today. So Mary, joined by your husband, Howard Schneiderman, welcome to this space. Thank you for your support. I also want to welcome back Ray Rist, the Vice Chair of the Horowitz Foundation and a proud, I've learned, WashU alum. So thank you, Ray, for being here. And thank you all the friends and family, members of the Horowitz Foundation, the grant recipients that are from all across our nation and around the globe. Welcome to this installation. I'm also grateful for many members of our Brown School National Council that are here today. I know Tom Hillman, Jean Kahn is here in the house. We had a National Council meeting today. Thank you for starting the morning and coming back this afternoon. Our efforts in the area of social work, public health, and social policy are among the most important ways in which Washington University advances positive change in St. Louis, across the nation, and across the globe. I'm confident that in the years ahead, the Brown School will continue to be a global leader in creating a better society and improving human health for the benefit of all. We are honored to have Mary Curtis Horowitz as part of our community, lifting us up as a leader in social policy. I'm grateful to so many of you that have also brought Mary and so many champions to our Brown School and Washington University. So Mary, you know that you're a, may I say it, 1968 graduate of Washington University. You worked for 45 years in academic publishing, first at CBS, then at Wiley, and finally as president and chairman of the board of Transaction Publishing. Mary, along with her late husband, Irving, were passionate about social change and founded the Horowitz Foundation for Social Policy, which Mary now chairs and serves as a member of the Board of Trustees. Personally, I'm honored to also serve on the Horowitz Foundation as a trustee, alongside with two other Brown School faculty members. The mission is so important, Mary, you know that, awarding grants to aspiring PhD candidates to support their dissertation work. Irving Lewis Horowitz was dedicated to supporting students across his career. Ray Rist was one of those students. He taught at many institutions around the world, including in our own sociology department here at WashU from 1963 to 1969. We have some colleagues from our sociology department as well. Please let me at least acknowledge David Cunningham, Hetty Lee, both professors in sociology, and Hetty, you also hold a joint appointment with our schools, so welcome. Welcome to this installation. So, in addition to WashU, Irving served as the chair of the sociology departments at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. He was also a distinguished professor emeritus of sociology and political science at Rutgers. A renowned sociologist and writer, Irving was widely regarded as the authoritative voice on Cuban communism and authored works on political theory, education, and public policy. Recognized in many ways for his contribution to public life, we're proud that, Mary, you've chosen to honor him here at the Brown School with the creation of the Irving Lewis Horowitz Professor in Social Policy. To celebrate today's inaugural installation, I am so honored to be joined by Washington University's Chancellor, Andrew D. Martin, and Provost Beverly Wendland. I'd like to invite Chancellor Martin and Mary Horowitz to the stage so that we can continue our program. Please.
It is a tradition at our university installation ceremonies to present a medallion inscribed with the Washington University seal, both to the beneficiaries of the endowed position and to the donors. Mary, I am honored to present you with a medallion that reads, Irving Lewis Horowitz Professorship in Social Policy, Brown School, and a plaque that reads, in grateful appreciation, presented to Mary Curtis Horowitz, October 12th, 2021. So now we have the opportunity to hear remarks from Mary, a generous and gracious alumna. Please join me in welcoming Mary Horowitz.
As I began compiling my list of people to be invited to today's installation, I was reminded of the many worlds Irving Lewis Horowitz inhabited: academic life, publishing, public affairs, and more. He touched so many lives, and a few of you are here in person to acknowledge this. Ray Rist, who's been mentioned, his former student and a friend of many years, and Irving's colleague, friend, and now my husband, Howard Schneiderman. I know many others are with us here and virtually, and I'm so grateful for your presence. Today's program tells you something about Irving, but not much about why this professorship is being endowed at Washington University and the Brown School. Irving Lewis Horowitz spent most of his academic life at Rutgers University, but his years at Washington University in the turbulent 1960s were pivotal to the trajectory of his career. When asked what he did, Irving always answered, "I write, teach, and publish social science." These three facets of his career took root at Washington University, so it is fitting that this chair in his name be endowed here. It was at Washington University that Irving joined colleagues to found Transaction magazine, conceived as the social science equivalent to Scientific American. It was later renamed Society. Transaction informed and influenced the public about core issues of that era: race relations, campus unrest, and the Vietnam War. After the government grants funding the magazine ran out, Irving acquired Transaction from Washington University, and it became the foundation of Transaction Publishers, in later years considered by many to be one of the most important social science publishers in this country. It was also at Washington University that Irving mentored a generation of young scholars. He was a charismatic teacher, challenging his students to reach for the stars. I know because I was one of those students, fortunate to take a graduate seminar with him in my senior year here at Washington University. Irving's experience with doctoral students at Washington University and later at Rutgers led him to establish the Horowitz Foundation for Social Policy in 1997. Today, 3 of the foundation's trustees are at Washington University, including Mary McKay, our dean. During his Washington University years, Irving wrote some of his most influential books, among them The War Game, 3 Worlds of Development, and The Rise and Fall of Project Camelot. These books were typical of Irving's writing throughout his career, conceptually rich but not abstract, grounded in openness toward public scrutiny and discourse, and unafraid of controversy. At heart, though, Irving was an essayist, and during his years at Washington University, he wrote more than 80 articles and essays. One of the most notable may have been his 1965 article, The Stalinization of Fidel Castro, which challenged those who romanticized the Cuban regime, making him one of the earliest critics. Public policy was a common thread in everything Irving did in his Washington University years. He crisscrossed the country addressing issues of the day. He testified before congressional committees and national commissions. He even participated in politics, actively working in Robert Kennedy's presidential campaign. Irving was a public intellectual before that phrase became common currency. How would Irving feel about having a professorship in his name? I'm not entirely sure. Although he was rarely silent, as everyone who ever knew Irving knows, he was never vain or self-indulgent, and he didn't particularly like to put himself forward in any way. He resisted being labeled. He was never ostentatious. In part, he may have been concerned about just who might become the Irving Lewis Horowitz professor. He was always suspicious of ideologists of any stripe, and supportive of a social science that delivered credible findings, whether they supported or challenged the status quo, or his own views for that matter. That's why I'm confident that despite any reservations Irving might have had about the idea of a professorship in his name, he would applaud the selection of Douglas Luke as the first Irving Lewis Horowitz Professor of Social Policy. Professor Luke exemplifies the kind of social science that Irving championed throughout his life. Research grounded in evidence, not ideology, and research directed toward urgent social policy issues rather than ivory tower thinking. Doug Luke tackles real-world problems, teases out what works and what does not, and uses innovative approaches to address important public policy concerns. His is the kind of work that inspires confidence in what we social scientists can do, and his is the kind of work that will guide all of us toward a better world. Congratulations, Doug.
Thank you, Mary. I have a lot of questions for you over dinner. Thank you for sharing those wonderful remarks with us. It is now my distinct pleasure to recognize Professor Doug Luke. Professor Luke has an outstanding record of scholarship and a passion for evidence-based public health policy and system science. So Doug earned his Bachelor's of Arts here at Washington University before beginning his career in psychology. First completing his PhD at the University of Illinois, and then as an assistant professor at Michigan State University. He then transitioned to the School of Public Health at St. Louis University as an associate professor and the Biostats Division Director in the Department of Community Health and the Director of the Center for Tobacco Policy Research. Thank goodness Doug came to Washington University in 2008. He returned and joined the Brown School as a professor of public health and a founding faculty member of the Institute for Public Health. At the Brown School, he has used system science methods, especially social network analysis and agent-based modeling, to tackle important public health problems. In addition to his faculty role, Doug is the Director of Evaluation for the Institute of Clinical and Translational Science, a founding member of the Network of Dissemination and Implementation Researchers here at WashU, and the Director of the Center for Public Health System Science. He's impacted the community tremendously with both his professional and personal commitments. I'm not going to talk about your music career, but I might over dinner. These qualities and achievements make him an exceptional fit for this professorship. As the Dean of the Brown School, I am thrilled to have to come to know you, Doug, as an incredible member of our faculty, and I am so proud to count you as a member of our community. I am certain that your colleagues, your students who are here, whether they're in person or virtually, can attest Professor Luke is kind, caring, and dedicated to his social science, Mary, and to our Brown School and Washington University community. Doug's a leader in our school, although he's been on sabbatical. I reminded him it was almost over this week. And he has created an incredible legacy at the Brown School. He's already living up to his new role as the Irving Lewis Horowitz Professor in Social Policy. At this time, I ask Chancellor Martin and Professor Luke to come forward for the installation.
Douglas, at this time, I'd like to officially name you the Irving Lewis Horowitz Professor in Social Policy. And I'm honored to present you with this medallion, which you may wear or not wear at your discretion.
I'm wearing it.
On the front, it says Douglas Luke, October 12th, 2021, and on the reverse, the Irving Lewis Horowitz Professor in Social Policy at the Brown School.
This is new for me.
There you go. Let's go. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Douglas Luke, the Irving Lewis Horowitz Professor in Social Policy, who will present his chair address titled System Science and the System of Science, A Journey Towards Impact. Doug, congratulations.
Wow. Thank you, Chancellor Martin, Provost Wendland, Dean McKay, Eddie. and especially Mary Horowitz. This is an incredible honor. It is an honor, and I've been explaining this to my family over the last few months, but being my family, they've just been teasing me. And they've asked me questions like, what is this chair thing? And doesn't WashU already give you a chair? But I'm so glad they're here with me today for this great day. It is a special honor for me as the inaugural holder of the Irving Lewis Horowitz Professorship, given Irving and Mary's long careers dedicated to supporting and enhancing social policy research of all kinds. I'm particularly impressed with the work of the Horowitz Foundation, as we heard about, which I think has double impact. First, by focusing on innovative social policy research, and second, by investing in the work and careers of doctoral students in the social sciences. As a recent director of the Public Health Sciences doctoral program here at the Brown School, anything that provides additional funding to doctoral students is near and dear to my heart. And I know there's a number of doctoral students in the audience and hopefully watching, and if you're doing policy research, please apply to support your work. I just used the word impact, and as you might guess from my talk title, that is going to be my theme today. This is a bit of a tall order, but in the next few minutes, I'd like to illustrate how the intersection of three different aspects of my work and the work of my colleagues is related to impact. Specifically, the combination of policy research using system science methods and then translating the fruits of that research using principles of implementation science increases the likelihood of impact. Looking back on my work, I think the combination of all three has been important. First, a little background. As is so often the case, my journey started in a small town in the Midwest. Namely, in 1979, I arrived in St. Louis as an eager and very naive undergraduate at WashU. At that time, Chancellor Danforth was reading bedtime stories to us in the swamp, and the dorms were not quite yet the luxurious palaces they've become. But it was a place where I first learned about how we can study the world around us. I learned from Lenny Green in psychology what the social sciences were and how we can formulate scientific questions. I learned from Ed Spitznagel in mathematics how to collect and analyze data about the world. In his class, for example, I analyzed data and discovered that undergraduates who went to church more often also went on fewer dates. Aha, I said to myself, I'll stop going to church so that my social life might improve. I very quickly learned that correlation does not imply causation. My next stop was one state over, where I completed my doctorate in community psychology and learned that if we wanted to improve people's lives, we were better off focusing on people's neighborhoods, communities, and social systems. More about this in a few minutes. My academic career in public health really started in the mid-90s down the road at St. Louis University. That's when I figured out that public health policy is where I really wanted to spend my time. Much of this early work focused on tobacco control, and this is also when I started working with my longtime friends and collaborators, Kurt Ribisel from the University of North Carolina and Lisa Henriksen from Stanford. Finally, I came full circle in 2008 when I was able to join the faculty here at the Brown School to help build new public health programs and activities. This happened in large part through the vision and leadership of Chancellor Wrighton and Dean Lawler. Chancellor Wrighton's vision of academic excellence was an enduring principle, although he routinely terrified new faculty by suggesting that all we needed to do was be the best in the world at what we do. Dean Lawler impressed on the new public health group his vision of the Brown School as, quote, not just another social science department, which we took to mean that our work needed to break out of the academy. It needed to benefit those around us. It needed to have impact. Dean McKay has taken this principle and enshrined it in the mission statement of the Brown School. Every day, pre-COVID, every day when I go to my office, I pass these words. They remain inspiring to me. Now I'd like to turn to one line of my work that I think best illustrates how the combination of policy research, system science methods, and implementation science can combine together to lead to public health impact. Tobacco use remains one of the largest threats to health around the world. Pre-COVID, smoking and other forms of tobacco use constituted the leading cause of preventable death and disease. In the United States alone, almost 500,000 people die each year from tobacco use. However, tobacco control is also one of the best examples of the importance of policy science. Evidence-based policies such as product taxation and smoke-free laws are the reason that tobacco control is considered one of the signature successes of public health in the 20th century. Public health policy scientists increasingly view tobacco control as a complex system. And what you see here is a causal map of this complex system. You may not be able to see the detailed boxes or arrows, but this map shows that the tobacco control system is made up of different types of actors. For example, the government, the tobacco industry, tobacco control programs, and that all of these actors interact with each other. There are tools that can be used to study these types of complex systems, and these tools make up what is called system science. For today, the important idea is that policy development, policy implementation, and policy evaluation is more effective if we take into account this complex system when we design our research. Just one sec. Where was I? So let me pause here a second to emphasize the importance of policy science in public health. In a paper that Ross Bronson, Deborah Hare-Joshua, and I wrote a number of years ago, we suggested that policies are social mechanisms that shape environments and systems. That is, policies provide the context for the who, what, where, when, and how of systemic and individual behavior that then leads to health. For example, in 2019, federal legislation raised the purchase age of all tobacco products to 21. This is a policy that says who can purchase products and where they can be purchased. We now emphasize policy development in public health and implementation because they are the most cost-effective interventions that can reach the most people and that can be sustained over time. For the past decade or so, I and my colleagues at the Center for Public Health System Science have worked in the area of tobacco retailer policy. Why focus on retailers? Tobacco products remain the most highly marketed products in the world. Just in the US, the tobacco industry spends almost $1 million an hour, every hour of every day, on advertising and marketing. You may not realize it, but there are 27 tobacco retailers for every McDonald's in the country. This is a vast oversupply. We don't need that many tobacco retailers in the world. This is a vast oversupply, as my colleague Lisa Henriksen points out. So what does this look like on the ground? Here we see a map of Boston, with each tobacco retailer marked by a red dot. The average distance from a home to the nearest retailer is just over 1/10 of a mile, or 1 to 2 blocks. This ubiquity of tobacco retailers in city neighborhoods we sometimes call a tobacco swamp. Not only are tobacco retailers everywhere in our communities, but they tend to concentrate in poorer neighborhoods and in neighborhoods of color. So the public health challenge here is that living in these tobacco swamps is associated with an increased likelihood of smoking initiation in youth, as well as making it harder for smokers to quit. So the policy response is to develop new policies that reduce this concentration of retailers, which can act to decrease availability of tobacco products, reduce exposure to advertising and other cues, change social norms, and in general, reduce the number of tobacco swamps in communities. So we have been studying policies designed to reduce the concentration of tobacco retailers with support from a series of National Cancer Institute project and center grants, and in close collaboration with many other scientists, particularly Ross Hammond here at WashU, Kurt Ribisol, and Lisa Henriksen. This project, called Tobacco Town, uses system science methods to build simulation models where we can examine possible policy effects across different kinds of environments. We also work with community stakeholders to tailor these computational models to specific places. Tobacco Town is what we call this model. It's an agent-based model where we can build environments in the computer, populate them with agents, for example, adult smokers, and observe them interact with their environments over time. Then we can introduce new types of policies which change the environment, for example, by removing certain retailers, and then observe what happens. This is an early visual prototype of Tobacco Town, and here you can see city residents moving from their homes to work and back. It's a very abstract city in this early Tobacco Town version. And they move back and forth from home to work, and they stop at retailers when they need to purchase more cigarettes. So we study this model in the computer and see what we can learn about possible policy effects. What have we learned? So after a number of years of building and enhancing a series of these Tobacco Town models, there's been a number of lessons that have emerged. First, there is no real one-size-fits-all retailer policy. Policy effects depend on context. In this figure, for example, each column shows retailer density for different types of communities. Urban, low-income communities, like on the left-hand column, have the highest density of retailers, while rural and suburban communities start out with much lower density. Also, we're discovering that combining or layering multiple policies is likely to have the strongest effect rather than putting all of your eggs in one policy basket. In more recent models and in work directed by Todd Combs, we have moved from abstract city types to look at policy effects in 30 actual large cities in the US. We see the same pattern of context dependency. Different types of policies have different effects across the cities. For example, consider New York in the upper left. New York starts out with an extremely high concentration of retailers. Given that environment, the only policy that really reduces proximity to retailers is a school-to-retailer buffer policy. That is, removing retailers that are too close to schools. Kansas City, on the other hand, with a different pattern of retailer density, would benefit equally from either a school-based policy or a policy that reduces retailers through license caps. The point here is that by using computational modeling, we can examine more policies across more cities in a shorter amount of time, which may help speed up subsequent policy development and testing in the real world. Okay, now I'd like to turn to the second part of my talk, which focuses more on how we do our science and why it matters for impact. This is familiar ground for many of you, but it turns out that the way academia is structured gets in the way of translating scientific knowledge into benefits for society and health. I don't have time to go into great detail here, but a few examples should make this clearer. Publish or perish leads to safe science that is inherently proprietary. We as scientists talk primarily to each other and spend little time talking to those who fund our work, who adopt our work, who implement new practices and policies based on our work. And all of this is quite slow. So, in the last few minutes I have, I'd like to share some of the ways that I and my colleagues have tried to lower or remove some of these roadblocks. First, by giving away our science through active dissemination of translational products. And second, by developing a new framework for measuring scientific impact that can lead to new ways to train, hire, evaluate, and promote translational scientists in academic institutions such as WashU. I learned the importance of giving away our science from my early mentors in community psychology at the University of Illinois in the mid-'80s, particularly my advisor, Julian Rappaport, and my mentors, Ed Seidman and Bruce. And if you're on the line, hi, guys. Not only did I learn how to view individual health through a community lens, but they taught me how communities and neighborhoods should be the recipients of the fruits of the social and health sciences research program. So how do we do this? Well, this is where the third arm of my impact triangle comes into play, dissemination and implementation science. We can give away our science through active development and dissemination of evidence-based tools and other types of resources. We organize our own work to make it easier to get from research to practice. For example, in our NCI-funded Aspire Center, we have a dissemination and implementation core led by the amazing Laura Brossart. The D&I Core's job is to be a bridge between tobacco control scientists and tobacco control community leaders and policymakers. An important element of this is to ask community partners how they would like to receive translational resources. Hint, it's not through scientific journals. As you can see in the left-hand figure, they've told us that they much prefer fact sheets, case studies, and policy briefs. We develop and disseminate numerous products based on these community partner preferences for topic, type, audience, and frequency. And you can see some of these products here. And we think this approach works. In our own evaluations, we see heavy usage and awareness of these translational products. For example, 85% of state tobacco control managers have used at least one of our best practices user guides that are developed for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They also tell us how they're using these resources. One program manager said that we've used the user guides for defending program activities, educating leadership and new staff, and providing technical assistance to grantees and communities statewide. I was told early on in my career that I shouldn't spend too much time on methods and tools development because the path toward academic success was primarily through empirical publications. Well, I had learned a slightly different lesson from my father, Robert Luke, when I was younger. When I was a teenager, he was a cabinet maker, and you can see one of his creations here. He also subscribed to the most boring magazines imaginable, with titles like Shop Notes, Hand Tools, and Whittling, with articles like The Real Truth About Block Planes. I asked him why he read such boring magazines, and he told me that tools were always interesting because that's what you use to create things that are useful and beautiful. In the social sciences, tools are what we use to gather evidence. And we need a lot of different types of tools to get all the different kinds of evidence that we need. So our work has had more impact because of how we've developed and disseminated a variety of research and evaluation instruments. For example, we have developed 2 measurement tools to assess sustainability of evidence-based programs and practices in public health and clinical settings. These tools are designed to be easy to use, free, and adapted for different audiences. For example, we have both Spanish and Portuguese versions of these instruments available. By giving away these tools, they have ended up being used around the world to assess thousands of programs, except in Greenland, apparently. The last resource example I'd like to highlight is a series of online interactive dashboards we've developed, which are designed to allow community members to explore how various policy interventions may affect their own cities and neighborhoods, especially for how policies can reduce tobacco-related disparities. Here you see our Tobacco Swamps dashboard. This screenshot shows Philadelphia, and each red dot again is a tobacco retailer. The dashboard here shows that the concentration of retailers in the poorest Philadelphia neighborhoods is almost 5 times as dense as compared to the wealthiest neighborhoods. This is a huge disparity. More importantly, the dashboard can then be used to select certain retailer policies and see how they might reduce these disparities. Here we see that if Philadelphia adopted a policy that restricted tobacco sales within 600 meters of schools, then not only is the overall concentration of retailers in the city dramatically reduced, but the income disparity would be entirely eliminated. Well, let me say one more thing on this. This type of tool is built on top of a pretty sophisticated computational simulation, but it's packaged in a way that fosters knowledge exploration and community-relevant policy design. The second important example of how we have worked to reduce roadblocks to scientific impact is our recent development of the Translational Science Benefits Model, or TSBM for short. This came out of our evaluation work for the WashU Institute of Clinical and Translational Sciences and our desire to move beyond counting widgets in academic evaluation, as my colleague Bobby Carruthers coined the phrase. So she said widgets were counting the papers and the publications and the grants. But the public doesn't really care about publications. Shocking, I know. They care about whether our science is helping to save lives and improve health. So in our model, Translational science impacts are mostly found in these 4 places: in clinical and healthcare settings, in community settings and population health, in new economic activities, and in new policies and legislation. Developed initially as an evaluation framework, the TSBM has grown rapidly to include many different types of resources, including case studies showing how clinical research projects have yielded specific types of health and social benefits. Here we see a case study from the Oregon Clinical and Translational Research Institute that used the TSBM to frame their own evaluation findings. To be honest, we've been stunned with how the TSBM has taken off. The TSBM is being used by a large number of other clinical and translational science awardees in addition to our own ICTS. Federal funders are starting to use the TSBM in new grant-making initiatives. National training institutes, such as our own Enola Proctor's Implementation Research Institute, are using the TSBM to help train their young scientists to design for impact early in their careers. And perhaps most exciting for me, we are hoping to use the TSBM to help embed the idea of impact into Washington University's strategic planning around public health. Public health is about public impact, and that's how we should shape public health here at WashU as we continue into the 21st century. As academics age, I find that we get more impatient. Particularly, we don't want to waste time on work that has little value. As many of you know, community impact is one of the underlying pillars of WashU's current strategic plan. So I am heartened that I am at a place and work with colleagues who want us to move in the same direction to make this journey towards impact. Everything I've talked about today has been shaped by so many people, some of them listed here. My thanks to them, and especially my friends and colleagues at the Center for Public Health System Science for being part of my personal and professional life. But since I'm out of time, let me thank 2 specific people who've had the greatest impact in my life, my 2 Susans. My mother, Susan Luke, who taught me to be curious about the world, and my wife, Susan England, who taught me to care about the world. Thank you so much.
Well, these remarks just don't do it, Doug. It is my privilege to thank you on behalf of us all for that outstanding presentation, for the thought that went into that talk. And can I tell you that Doug isn't a really effective public speaker, but he was practicing yesterday as I talked to him. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for putting together a talk that intertwines your family, your colleagues, and the difference that you're trying to make in the world. Please join me once again in acknowledging Professor Doug Luke and Mary Horowitz. You are both, along with so many of you, making a true difference in the world. Thank you for the first inaugural professorship, the Irving Lewis Horowitz Professorship in Social Policy. Please join me in another round of applause. Thank you all for coming in person. Thank you for filling the space with good science, good colleagues, and work that makes a difference. Have a good evening. Thank you.